Hi, Room 203. Happy Sunday. I'm going to read a chapter from Matilda, and this one's called Miss Honey, and it's a long chapter. So we're on page 66 already. Matilda was a little late in starting school. Most children began primary school at 5 or even just before. But Matilda's parents, who weren't very concerned one way or the other about their daughter's education, had forgotten to make the proper arrangements in advance. She was 5 and a half when she entered school for the very first time. The village school for younger children was a bleak brick building called Crunchin Hall Primary School. It was about 250 pupils, aged from 5 to just under 12 years old. The head teacher, the boss, the supreme commander of this establishment, was a formidable middle-aged lady whose name was Miss Trunchbull. Naturally, Matilda was just put in the bottom class, where there were like 18 other small boys and girls about the same age as her. Their teacher was called Miss Honey, and she could not have been more than 23 or 24 years old. She had lovely pale oval Madonna face with blue eyes, and her hair was a light brown. Her body was so slim and fragile, one got the feeling that if she fell over, she would smash into 1,000 pieces like a porcelain figure. Miss Jennifer Honey was a mild and quiet person who never raised her voice and was seldom seen to smile, but there is no doubt she possessed that rare gift for being adored by every small child under her care. She seemed to understand totally the bewilderment and fear that so often overwhelms young children who, for the first time in their lives, are herded into a classroom and told to obey the orders. Some curious warmth that was almost tangible shone on Miss Honey's face when she spoke to a confused and homesick newcomer to the class. Miss Trunchbull, the headmistress, was something else altogether. She was a gigantic holy terror, a fierce, tyrannical monster who frightened the life out of the pupils and the teachers alike. There was an aura of menace about her even at a distance, and when she came up close, you could almost feel the dangerous heat radiating from her from a red-hot rod of metal. When she marched, Miss Trunchbull never walked. She always marched like a stormtrooper with long strides and arms a-swinging. When she marched along a corridor, you could actually hear her snorting as she went. As if a group of children happened to be in her path, she plowed right on through them like a tank, with small people bouncing off to her left and to her right. Thank goodness we don't meet many people like her in the world. Although they do exist, and all of us are in this world, are likely to come across at least one of them in a lifetime. If you ever do, you should behave as if you would met an enraged rhinoceros out in the bush, climbing to the nearest tree and stay there until it has gone away. This woman, in all of her eccentricities and her appearance, is almost impossible to describe her, but I shall make some attempt to do it a little later on. Let us leave her for the moment and go back to Matilda and our first day of Miss Honey's class. There's a picture of Miss Honey. After the usual business of going through all the names of the children, Miss Honey handed out a brand new exercise book to every child. "You have brought your own pencil, I hope," she said. "Yes, Miss Honey," they chanted. "Good. Now this is the very first day of school for each of you. In the beginning of at least 11 long years of schooling, all of you are going to have to go through. And 6 of those years will be spent right here in Crunchin Hall, where, as you know, your headmistress is Miss Trunchbull. Let me, for your own good, tell you something about Miss Trunchbull. She insists upon strict discipline throughout the school. And if you take my advice, you will do your very best to behave yourself in her presence. Never argue with her. Never answer her back. Always do as she says. If you should get on the wrong side of Miss Trunchbull, she could liquidize you like a carrot in a kitchen blender. It's nothing to laugh about." Lavender, now take that grin off your face. All of you will be wise to remember that Miss Trunchbull deals very, very severely with anyone who gets out of line in this school. Have you got the message? "Yes, Miss Honey," chirped 18 eager little voices. "I myself," Miss Honey went on, "want to help you to learn as much as possible while you're in this class. This is because I know it will make things easier for you later on. For example, by the end of this week, I shall expect every one of you to know the 2 times table by heart. And in a year's time, I hope you will know all the multiplication tables up to 12. It will help you enormously if you do it. Now then, do any of you happen to have learnt the 2 times tables already?" Matilda put her hand up. She was the only one. Miss Honey looked carefully at the tiny girl with dark hair and a round, serious face. Wonderful. Please stand and recite as much as you can. Matilda stood up and began to say the 2 times tables. When she got to twice 12 is 24, she didn't stop. She went right on. Twice 13 is 26. Twice 14 is 28. Twice 15 is 30. Twice 16 is... Stop, said Miss Honey. She had been listening, slightly spellbound, to this smooth recital. How far can you go? How far? Said Matilda. Well, I don't really know. Here's a picture of her saying her times tables. There's Matilda. I don't know, Miss Honey, for quite a long while, I think. Miss Honey took a few moments to let this curious statement set in. You mean that you tell me that 2 times 28 is? Well, sure, what is it? 56, Miss Honey. What about something much harder, like 2 times 487? Could you tell me that? Why, I think so, yes. Are you sure? Why, yes, Miss Honey, I'm fairly sure. And there's Miss Honey. She's in shock. Well, it is then 2 times 400. Well, what then is 2 times 487? 964, Matilda said immediately. She spoke quietly and politely and without any sign of showing off. Miss Honey gazed at Matilda with absolute amazement, but then next to speak, she kept her voice level. This is really splendid, but of course multiplying by 2 is a lot easier than some of the bigger numbers. What about the other multiplication tables? Do you know any of those? Well, I think so, Miss Honey. I think I do. Which ones, Matilda? How far have you got? Well, I don't know. I don't know what you mean. I mean, for instance, you know the 3 times? Well, yes, Miss Honey. And 4 times? Yes, Miss Honey. There's Matilda. Well, how many do you know? Do you know all the way up to 12 times table? Well, yes, Miss Honey. What are the 12 sevens then? 84, Matilda said. Miss Honey paused and leaned back in her chair behind the plain desk that stood in the middle of the floor in front of the class. She was considering to be quite shaken up by this exchange, but she took care not to show it. She'd never come across a 5-year-old or even a 10-year-old who could multiply with such faculty. Well, I hope the rest of you are listening, because Matilda's a very lucky girl. She has wonderful parents who have already taught her to multiply lots of numbers. Was it your mother, Matilda, who taught you? No, Miss Honey, it wasn't. Well, it must have been your great father then. He must be a brilliant teacher. No, Miss Honey, my father didn't teach me. You mean you taught yourself? Well, I don't quite know, Matilda said truthfully. It's just I didn't find it very difficult to multiply one number by another. Miss Honey took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She looked again at the small girl with the bright eyes, standing beside her desk, as sensible and solemn as she was. You say you don't find it difficult to multiply one number by another, Miss Honey asked. Could you try to explain that a little bit? Oh dear, Matilda said, I'm not really sure. The class was silent. They were listening. For instance, Miss Honey asked, if I ask you to multiply 14 by 19, now that's too difficult. Well, no, it's 266, Matilda said. Miss Honey stared at her. Then she picked up a pencil and quickly worked out the sum on the piece of paper. What did you say it was? 266. Miss Honey put down her pencil, removed her spectacles, and began to polish the lenses with a piece of tissue. The class remained quiet, watching her and waiting for what would come next. Now tell me, Matilda, Miss Honey said, still polishing her glasses. Try to tell me exactly what goes on inside your head when you get a multiplication problem like that. You obviously have to work it out some way. Take the one you've just done, 14 multiplied by 19. I simply put the 14 down in my head and multiply it by 19. I'm afraid I don't know how else to explain it. I've always said to myself that if a little pocket calculator can do it, why shouldn't I? Well, why not indeed, Miss Honey said. The human brain is an amazing thing. I think it's a lot better than a lump of metal. That's all a calculator is, Matilda said. There's Miss Honey polishing her glasses. How right you are. Pocket calculators are not allowed in this school anyway. Miss Honey was feeling quite quivery. This was no doubt in her mind that she had met a truly extraordinary mathematical brain, and words like child genius and prodigy went flitting about her head. She knew that these sort of wonders do pop up in the world from time to time, but only once or twice in 100 years. After all, Mozart was only 5 when he started composing the piano, and look what happened to him. It's not fair, Lavender said. How can she do it and we can't? Don't worry, Lavender, you'll soon catch up, Miss Honey said, lying right through her teeth. At this point, Miss Honey could not resist the temptation of exploring still further the mind of this astonishing child. She knew she ought to be paying some attention to the rest of the class, but she altogether was too excited to let the matter rest. Well, pretending to address the whole class, let's have some sums for the moment and see if any of you are begun to learn to spell. Let's leave sums and do spelling. Who can spell cat? 3 hands went up. They belonged to Lavender and a small boy called Nigel and Matilda. Spell cat, Nigel. Nigel spelled it. Miss Honey now decided to ask a question that normally she would not have dreamed of asking. Well, I wonder whether any of you 3 know how to spell cat, have learned also how to read a whole group of words, like a sentence. Well, I have, Nigel said. So have I, said Lavender. Miss Honey went to the blackboard and wrote with her white chalk. I have already begun to learn how to read long sentences. She had purposely made it difficult, and she knew that there were precious few 5-year-olds around who could be able to manage it. Can you tell me what it says, Nigel? She asked. Too hard, Nigel said. Lavender? The first word is I, Lavender said. Can any of you read the whole sentence? Waiting for the yes, but she felt certain it was going to come from Matilda. Yes, Matilda said. Go ahead, Miss Honey asked. Matilda read the sentence without any hesitation. That's really, really very good indeed, Miss Honey said, making the understatement of her life. How much can you read, Matilda? I think I can read most things, Miss Honey, although I'm afraid I can't always understand what things mean. Miss Honey got to her feet. This is a book of humorous poetry. See if you can read that one aloud. Smoothly, without a pause, and at a very nice speed, Matilda began to read. An epicure dinner at Crewe found a rather large mouse in his stew. Cried the waiter, don't shout, and wave it about. On the rest will be wanting one too. Several children saw the funny side of the rhyme and laughed. Miss Honey said, do you know what an epicure means, Matilda? It's someone who's so dainty about his eating. That's correct, Miss Honey said. How do you happen to know what that particular type of poetry is called? It's called a limerick, Matilda said. That's a lovely one, too. It's funny. It's a famous one, Miss Honey said, picking up the book and returning it to the table in front of the class. A witty limerick is very hard to write. They look easy, but they most certainly are not. I know, Matilda said. I've tried quite a few times, but mine are never as good as that. You have you, Miss Honey said, more startled than ever. Well, Matilda, I would very much like to hear one of these limericks that you've come up with. Would you like to try to remember one for us? Well, Matilda said, hesitating, I've actually been trying to make up one about you, Miss Honey, while I've been sitting here. About me? Miss Honey cried. Well, we've certainly got to hear one like that, haven't we? Well, I don't think I want to say it, Miss Honey. Please tell me, Miss Honey said. I promise I won't mind. Well, I think you will, Miss Honey, because I have to use your first name to make things rhyme, and I don't want to say it. Well, how do you know my first name? I heard another teacher calling you by it. She called you Jenny. I insist upon hearing this limerick, Miss Honey said, smiling one of her rarest smiles. Stand up and recite. Reluctantly, Matilda stood up, and very slowly and very nervously she recited her limerick. The thing we all can ask about Jenny is surely there cannot be many young girls in this place with so lovely a face. The answer to that is not any. Oh my gosh, that's a good limerick. That's Matilda. The whole of Miss Honey's pale and pleasant face blushed a brilliant scarlet, and then once again she smiled. It was much broader this time, a smile of pure pleasure. Oh, why, thank you, Matilda. Although it is not true, it really is a very good limerick. Oh dear, I must try to remember that one. From the third row of desks, Lavender said, It's good, I like it. It's true as well, a small boy called Rupert said. Of course it's true, Nigel said. Already the whole class had begun to warm towards Miss Honey, although as yet she had hardly taken any notice of any of them except Matilda. Who taught you to read, Matilda? Miss Honey asked. Well, I just sort of taught myself, Miss Honey. And have you read any books all by yourself? Any children's books, I mean? Well, I've read all the ones that are in the public library on the High Street, Miss Honey. And did you like them? I liked some of them very much indeed, but I thought others were fairly dull. Tell me which one you liked. Well, I like the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think Mr. C.S. Lewis is a very good writer. In fact, he only has one failing. There's no funny bits in his books. It's true, they're very serious. There's Miss Honey. Her face is red. You are right there, Miss Honey said. There aren't many funny bits in Mr. Tolkien's either, Matilda said. Do you think that all children's books ought to have funny bits in them? Miss Honey asked. I do. Children are not so serious as grown-ups. They love to laugh. Miss Honey was astounded by the wisdom of this tiny girl. And what are you going to do now that you've read all the children's books? Well, I am reading other books now, Matilda said. I borrow them from the library. Mrs. Phelps is very kind to me. She helps me to choose them. Miss Honey was leaning far forward over her work table and gazing in the wonder of this child. She had completely forgotten the rest of the class. What about other books? She murmured. Well, I'm very fond of Charles Dickens, Matilda said. He makes me laugh a lot, especially Mr. Pickwick. At that moment, the bell in the corridor sounded for the end of the class. I think that her teacher is completely in shock that this little girl, five and a half years old, is able to do all of this wonderful stuff. She's quite a genius. So we are going to stop there. I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing all of your work you do this week on Seesaw. And think about what do you think is going to happen? I feel like we're going to hear from Mrs. Trunchbull, the head master of the school. I think something's going to happen with that. We'll see what happens. But I am done for today, and I will see you on Seesaw.